Thank you for listening to the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast with hosts Clara and Jimmy Hinton. If you're new to the podcast, please subscribe and share so you will never miss an episode. Android users can find us and subscribe on your Play Music app. Apple users can find us and subscribe on Apple Podcasts. You can find us on Stitcher. You can follow us on Spreaker. And you can find the podcasts on jimmyhinton.org or findingahealingplace.com. Please rate our show, subscribe, and share so that we can spread the word. Let's get into the show. Welcome to this week's podcast here with Jimmy Hinton.
And Jimmy's mom, Clara.
Good to be with our podcast community. I want to give a shout out. First of all, we are very excited, and we were just talking before we hit record that we have several patrons. Several of you have signed up and pledged to be patrons of this podcast, and that's just really cool.
We are super thankful. We are super excited about what we're going to be able to do for you, for our people. It's going to be amazing. And we couldn't do it without you. So a shout out again from both of us, and a big, huge thank you.
And it's a little bit of a selfish thing. We are going to benefit from our patrons. And I'm not talking about financially. I'm talking about getting to know you guys. Several of you are signing up. Like, this kind of surprised me, but you're signing up for the top tier, which is the VIP Plus, and the VIP Plus, which is only $25 per month. That's our top tier. We've not gone any higher than that, but at that tier, some of the rewards are pretty cool. So you'll get to do once a month Q&A with us by video chat. And that's going to be pretty cool to get to know you guys and just brainstorm. And,
it is.
Talk to you and hang out.
Yeah, I can't wait.
So I wrote some of you today, and I said, welcome to the Hinton party. So we're going to have fun, and that's just going to be really cool. And then the other thing at the VIP Plus level is that you guys will get to be guests on the podcast.
I love that.
And that's cool.
I truly love
because
that.
we'll get to formally interview you and hear your story and whatever you want to share. We won't really have any guidelines. It's just whatever you're comfortable sharing. And it doesn't even have to be about your story. If you just have something encouraging that you want to share with our listeners.
This is going to be so healing for so many. It's just going to be awesome.
Yeah. So, pretty cool stuff.
And honestly, this has given Jimmy and I a huge amount of encouragement to keep on keeping on.
Yeah.
So, thank you again.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've been getting a lot of really good feedback, and I don't know. It's just cool. That is definitely what keeps us going. And it's easy to burn out and forget or not know that you're making a difference. But I just had a phone call today with somebody who really encouraged me and just wanted to share with both me and Mom that the podcast, she stumbled on this a couple months ago and didn't know who we were before then. And it made a really big impact on her life. And those are just a really encouraging stories for us that,
so, yes.
I don't know. We just love hearing that. So it's definitely a God thing, and we appreciate all of you. And to our patrons who signed up, from the bottom of our hearts, thank you. And for those who might be on the fence about signing up as a patron, you can go to my website, jimmyhinton.org, click on the podcast tab, or just scroll down to the bottom on any one of the pages, and down at the bottom there's a little button that says,
right.
What's it say? I should know this. Become a patron, I think is what it says. So you just click on that and you can choose what level. But we definitely need support. We looked at a studio last week, a recording studio, and think we have something picked out. And we're looking at equipment already. And that's because of the generosity of our patrons. So we're hoping to be video recording these podcasts here really soon. So, yeah, cool stuff. Very encouraging. So today we want to talk about there's a big decline in church attendance in the U.S. And this has been going on for a while. And we've talked about that in some other podcasts. But the big question is it related or directly related to abuse and the way that churches handle abuse? And I don't know necessarily if there's like one big overarching reason why people are leaving the church. And really, I've not seen anybody study this.
No, I've looked too, Jimmy, for some kind of data. And of course, it's probably in the world of data, it's too soon. I mean, something like that, you have to study for 10, 20 years. But it's on our minds, how much of this is the decline in church attendance is related to abuse and lack of care within our churches, or is there an overall arching shift in people and society in the States, the U.S. especially, with how we worship?
Well, I think part of the problem is, I just pulled up an article by the Barna Group, and it's an excellent article. This is in 2016. I've been looking at studies from the Barna Group for, probably at least 15 years. And they're hands down probably the most reputable church group that, they study stats on churches and, very, very reputable
heard of
group.
Until today, honestly.
So I've known about the Barna Group for a long time, and they have this excellent article. It's called The State of the Church, 2016. And, I'll quote some things from this report. It's an excellent report, but there's nothing in here about abuse, sexual or otherwise. Mm-hmm. So, another person too is Tom Rainer. Tom Rainer has done tremendous studies on church decline and church growth, and he's done, I think, a pretty fantastic job. I've read tons of his books, but I was a little bit disappointed. I've never heard Tom Rainer, at least that I'm aware of, address abuse in the church. And I think part of the reason is both Tom Rainer, the Barna Group, and other groups that study church stats, church decline, they're not asking the questions. Mm-hmm. So it's not even on their radar.
It's not, right.
They'll ask generally, like, what was your reason for leaving? And I think a lot of people are probably just afraid to say it. So it's things like, well, we had a disagreement with somebody in the leadership. Right. So, there are these generic reasons.
Yeah, conflicts.
But
big.
I've not seen anybody study the relationship between abuse and people leaving the church. Now, we know there to be a pretty strong link.
Right.
Those of us in advocacy, we hear your stories. And we know. And, we interviewed Christine Parker when she talked about Porch Swing Ministries. And, she herself exited the church.
Right.
And, we know. And she started a ministry specifically for people who've left the church because of abuse.
Right.
So Porch Swing Ministries is all about ministering to people who are still faithful to God, but they can't step foot inside the church building. So we know that there's a strong link, but I don't know if it's the link for this mass exodus from church. Mm-hmm. And I certainly wouldn't say that with any degree of confidence, because that would just be a feeling. I think it really needs to be researched.
It does. And specific. That has to be a specific question. in order to get the right answer.
Well, I was a little bit disappointed. I'd reached out to Tom Rayner. It's probably been over a year now. But I had messaged him and I said, all this stuff is coming out in the news, and that abuse is rampant in the church.
Yep.
It's absolutely rampant. And, there are so many abuse survivors, and a lot of the abusers are in church leadership. And so, are you willing to write an article or do some kind of a study looking into this? And he never replied back. No response. Mm-hmm. And I find it a little bit perplexing that you can't find anything in his writings about abuse in the church. And my guess is it's probably something that he knows it's really energized. People get really energized about it.
It just hit me. You need to come up with a survey.
No, I'm not qualified to do it. I just, there are statisticians who, that's what they do by profession.
We do need something that will give some kind of a concrete link, but we know the decline has been going on for years and years.
Yeah.
For years and years, the church has not been on an upward swing. There's been a decline. The mass exodus is we're seeing it now real big.
Yeah, one of my friends that I went to seminary with, he just wrote an article. His name is Matt Dabbs, and he wrote an article at wineskins.org just on Wednesday. He wrote an article about the decline of the churches of Christ specifically. Mm. And, it was a really good post that he did. And he quoted statistics, and he showed that, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, that was the height of our church planting era. Mm-hmm. And in a decade, we averaged between 1,200 and about 1,800 church plants in the United States. That slowed down. And he also showed at the same time, the vast majority of churches, we all have a life cycle, and the vast majority of churches close their doors just over the 50-year mark. Okay, so
that's interesting.
So the average shelf life mm-hmm. for a church is under 100 years, and 99. He quoted another statistic, and I can't remember the source, but this source said that since the first century, 99.99% of churches close their doors just after 100 years.
Wow.
So, and my congregation is 100 and what? It's, I got to do some math. It started in 1910.
1910. Well,
so that makes it, what, 100 and...
We're 20.
109.
We're almost 2020, so 100.
Yeah,
it's
109, almost
right
110
now.
years old.
Yeah.
So the congregation that I'm at experienced a pretty dramatic decline in the last 4 years, where we've lost over half of our members.
Yeah.
And we're a church of under 100.
Mm-hmm. Right.
So, we're certainly experiencing what most other people are experiencing. But the thing is, instead of getting depressed about it, instead of saying, well, my goodness, we need to figure out what's causing the decline, I have some pretty good theories about that. But what I get encouraged about is that people still believe in God. People are still faithful to God. People still want to be involved in their communities and in the lives of other people. And I think part of the problem with us churches is that we've not accommodated very well or adapted. Accommodate's not the right word. We've not adapted very well to this push, really, that's been driven by millennials to go out mm-hmm. and physically reach our communities. Mm-hmm. So, instead what we focused on was, my goodness, we got to grow the church. And the focus
hitting the panic button that we need to do something.
So what people started to do is to compensate for that. we started springing up mega churches everywhere.
Yeah.
Mega churches. We got to grow them big, grow them fast, grow them hard. Mm-hmm. And we really focused on church attendance instead of discipleship and instead of service to community members. And so churches, not all of them, because I certainly visited a mega church that really impressed me. Like they were deeply involved in the life of the community. I was really impressed with this mega church. But a lot of them, the mega churches, as quickly as they sprung up, they also closed their doors because people realized, wait a second, like you're spoon feeding me and this is really shallow. Mm-hmm. And we were looking for substance. We were looking for depth. We were looking for community. We were looking for lives being transformed. I say
there's such a disconnect in most times in a large mega church. Mm-hmm. It's hard to plug in, get plugged in. It's you become just one of a mass sitting in a group, and it's a lot of it is entertaining rather than service oriented. And after a while, we know we need to be fed meat, spiritual meat.
Yeah.
So,
and abuse survivors especially understand that.
Right.
The need to be nurtured and to help nurture other people.
Yes.
One of the things that I find about survivors is even at points where they're barely functioning, maybe they're in a season in their life where they're doing a lot of processing and that's, that requires a lot of energy. And,
sure does.
They might be missing work. They might be physically ill. There's one thing that I've noticed, and it's almost true in every single case. Those survivors still can't help but to help other survivors.
I love that you said that because that is so true.
Yeah.
That is genuinely true. And those of us who have been there, we know it's true. Mm-hmm. We've been the recipient and the giver. Mm-hmm. So we understand what that means.
So I think what happens, a number of reasons why the church is in decline. And, certainly we know that abuse is one of the factors. To what degree, I don't really know. But another thing that's going on is we're not preparing to die. And that's my friend Matt in his article. He said, it's like we put these dying churches on life support and the focus now shifts to how long can we keep this baby alive? Let's keep it going. And so nobody wants to be the person who pulls the plug on grandma, and church leadership kind of becomes that way where our churches are on life support. And who wants to be the one to make that call?
An awesome illustration. I didn't read the article that you're referencing, but I love that. And I've never heard it before. So thank you.
Yeah.
I really appreciate that.
Well, the life support thing was mine.
Oh, well,
Matt didn't say that.
I love that.
But it's true.
That is an awesome illustration, Jimmy, of what's going on.
It is a very painful thing.
Yeah, it is.
To have to make the decision on behalf of your loved one who you see dying.
Right.
And at some point, you need to make that call,
right?
Because it moves from prolonging life into this weird, uncomfortable category of you're no longer prolonging life, you're prolonging suffering. Mm-hmm. And you know that death is inevitable, and the same is true for churches. We know that death is inevitable.
Really love that illustration because it explains so much. Yes.
So I think what some of these small churches are doing is they've invested so much time and energy and effort and, sweat and tears and all that stuff into the life of the church, who's their family, that church, that's your family. Right. And you get to this point where you feel like if you let the church die, that's on you. Mm-hmm. And so they prolong that death, and there's no quality of life for the church members there.
As you're talking, and there's a big misconception also of what the church is. Mm-hmm. We often conceive the church as the church building.
Right.
If we close the doors to the building, we consider the church dead. That's not how it works.
That's exactly right. So Matt Dabbs's point in his article was, there's actually incredible good news that the churches as we know it are dying. So he said, he starts the article off and he says, the bad news is the churches as we know it are dying. The good news is the churches as we know it are dying. And he said, what's happening is we're being forced to look in the mirror and to face this reality that we have to change the way that we're doing things in order for the kingdom to move on. And he's like, and the other good news is that since churches were planted in the first century, all of those churches died.
Right.
He's like, can you imagine, and he said in the article, can you imagine being the person who made the decision to close the doors of the church that Paul planted or that Paul preached at?
Yeah.
And he's like, but the reality is all of those churches are gone. They don't exist anymore.
But the
kingdom moves on. And he's like, the kingdom will never die.
And that's the beautiful thing. That's beautiful.
So, we get so attached to our local churches. And I think survivors especially feel this pain because there's so much loss when they make a decision that is too painful to keep going there. And so there's a separation of family when they leave the corporate church.
Right.
And my thing is, shame on the church members who are part of that corporate body because they should realize that it's not these four walls that make up the church. Right. It's the people.
Yes.
And so if these survivors are leaving the church, or they're leaving corporate church, they're still part of the body. They still belong to the kingdom.
Absolutely.
There's still people who we should keep them involved in our lives. And we should keep them involved.
They can teach.
Absolutely.
They can nurture. They can help. They can be part of the family.
So, we, a couple things. One, we don't prepare to die. So I think if we're going to make positive impact as a church, as a body of believers, we ought to prepare for our congregations to die. So the way you do that is you leave a legacy, right?
Right.
Like, I know that I'm going to die one day. And I don't lament that. That's a reality. We're all going to die.
Right.
So instead of stressing over how long can I keep myself alive, what I do right now is say, what kind of a legacy can I leave behind? Right. And so my children will live on, hopefully, prayerfully, after I'm dead. My children will live on. So part of my legacy is I teach them right from wrong. I teach them about God. I teach them to love other people. I teach them to serve other people. Right. I show them how to do that. We just got back from Ecuador. I took Eden to my 9-year-old daughter. I took her to Haiti in March. We take them and show them how to love other people and how to travel, and that there are Christians all over the world. And
which is a beautiful thing. And we're not saying that every church building is eventually going to shut their doors, and that's not the whole point. The point is God's kingdom, the kingdom will continue whether there's a building in that area or not.
Right. So, I think another point is in this Barna study, the one that I referenced, it's called The State of the Church 2016. And this is available online. Excellent article. But it shows that 73% of people in the U.S. identify as Christian, but then when you look at attendance, only 31% of those are practicing Christians. And then he kind of breaks that down, and people could get depressed over that, or they could say, okay, 31% of people are practicing Christians. How do we engage the people who aren't? Because they're still Christians, right? They're still believers.
Yes.
How do we engage them in meaningful ways? How do we connect them? In
other words, they believe in God. They believe there is a God. They pray.
Absolutely.
But they're not getting up and going to a church building every week and with regular attendance.
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about.
So here's another thing in this study, how Americans experience and express their faith. 75% of Americans say that they pray to God regularly. 75%.
I believe that with all of my heart. For 20 something years now, I've been running a big grief site. What is interesting to me, when I first started out, there was very little openly expressed saying, I believe in prayer, I believe in God, I rely on God for my strength, my help. Today, any given day, when I go on that site, when I go on that page, there's there's over 250,000 people there now that visit regularly every day. Prayer is always there. God is always there in a very positive way. People, these parents of lost will say, I don't know how anyone makes it without God. They're very vocal about it, supporting and loving each other there. Do they all attend church? No. No, very few do. And they have their specific reasons why, but they do believe in prayer. They do believe in God. They are letting others know you need God in your life. You need prayer.
Yeah.
So,
well, I mean, there are some really encouraging things that come out of this. And I think some people are going to read like the Barna study and, they're going to look at some of these things and they're going to get really frustrated because Barna, the point of his study is not to give a solution and say, well, here's the direction we need to go. He doesn't do that. Barna's job is to do what the Barna Institute does. They just study trends in the church.
Stats.
That's right.
Yeah. Okay.
They give statistics.
Right.
So, I get really encouraged because in the Barna study, it showed that Christians are the most giving by far financially. They're the most giving out of any other group of people that exists.
That is so encouraging to hear.
Yeah.
It really is.
So they're very liberal with their money, and I love that.
I do too.
So the question is, what do we do about that? Okay, so we have so many people out there who, you're survivors, and you might feel alienated, you might feel alone. Hang in there. For one, I would encourage people to visit Porch Swing Ministries. Christine Parker is doing a phenomenal job. She's really working hard to connect people who are outcast from church, who still believe in God. She really does a good job of ministering to survivors. Definitely visit her site. Another thing people say all the time, well, we wish that we lived closer and could be part of your church. Well, I have good news for you. This past Sunday, we live streamed for the first time. Now, keep in mind, we're a small church. We do not have a lot of money. I think sometimes people think that because of my advocacy work that I'm at some big church and have all these resources at my fingertips. Our church averages about 50 in attendance. We're a small church in a very poor community.
Yeah. Yes.
And they're some of the most incredible people that I know at my congregation. So we finally live streamed for the first time just on this past Sunday. And we didn't advertise it. We didn't tell anybody about this. We had 22 people during our church service who were tuned in, who were watching it live.
And I told
you were one of them.
I was one of them. I was super excited about that. Super, super excited.
Well, it raised one of our deacons raised a question after, because I told him I was really excited. I was kind of giddy about it. And I'm like, this is so cool. I'm like, I expected maybe one or two. And, because we have people who are shut-ins. They can't get out physically.
Yeah.
And, we've been finding ways to stay connected to them. And it's hard to do because the old method is you visit house to house to house. Right. Well, you visit one house and you're there for 3 hours.
Right. It's impossible to do time-wise. No.
You can't do it. Mm-mm. So, we were kind of talking about that. And so a lot of those people were really excited because they're like, we get to actually watch you guys as it's happening. And we get to be live.
And sing the hymns. Yeah. And listen to the Bible study. And participate in communion.
Yeah.
Right with, and there is a connection there. I'm super.
But one of our deacons raised a really interesting question. I hadn't even thought about it because he takes attendance each week. And there's no real reason to do it except we've done it for 109 years, and I think it's pretty cool. I like to go back and look at where were we 50 years ago, and we have stats on that. But he goes, this raises a pretty interesting question. Should I count those 22 people? Because they were here. Yeah. They were with us.
I think most certainly.
And I was like, that's a good point. That's a really good point. I think
most certainly, Jimmy.
So anyway, yeah, we're talking about that, and we're going to find out how to include those people. And I think what we might do is take attendance for people who are there, and then put a count up of people who were online during the service.
That's a great idea.
But it's exciting. Yeah. Like, to me, this is really cool. And I think there's so much potential for all of you survivors who have felt alienated from the church community. Yes. And that stinks for you. You shouldn't feel alienated if you can't physically go to a church building for whatever reason, whether it's health or whether it's mental health. You shouldn't be alienated from the church. And because you are the church. If we really believe that the church is made up of people, then we've got to find ways to connect each other and to stay connected, and to do that and to assemble together at the same time.
I think this is just a wonderful way of doing just that, Jimmy.
It's really cool.
Reaching out, connecting, the whole thing.
It's really cool. Mm-hmm. So, the potential is limitless, and I envision people, live streaming, whether it's our church. It doesn't have to be our church by any means. I'm certainly not plugging our church. But whether it's us or whoever it is, if you live stream with the church, anybody can click and watch. Mm-hmm. But what about gathering people from your community who have been injured by the church or whatever, or they just don't feel comfortable walking inside of a church building? Host a streaming party at your house.
Have
and participate in
and connect
a church service with somebody and do it in your home.
Yes.
So one of the big reasons why house churches don't make it is because people burn out.
Right.
They're like, man, I got to put together a sermon. I've got, I've got to put class together. I've got to do da. We've got to find a way to financially support this. Okay. Take all that stress off. Live stream. The technology is here. And then host a gathering, an assembly at your house, and have church together. I love
that. I just really do.
Yeah.
It is really exciting.
So anyway, if there are people from our podcast, I know our podcasts are pretty specific to abuse, but man, if there are people from this community who you decide that you want to be part of our church community, let me know what you want to hear sermons on. I would be more than happy to do that. I'd be excited to do that. Man, we just love this community, and I love that we're getting more and more connected.
Right. Yes.
I love that we have patrons now. I love that we get emails from people. I put a post on my Facebook page, the jimmyhinton.org Facebook page, a couple weeks ago, and it was just something that it was on my mind, and I just wanted to encourage people. And the volume of comments that came back that were a direct encouragement to me, it blew my mind. And I was like, this is why I love this community.
Right.
They're just so giving of their time and encouragement, and I don't know.
And I think we just want everybody to know the church is very alive.
Absolutely.
Very much alive, even though the statistics look dismal as far as church attendance to a building. That does not mean that the church of our Lord is dying.
No.
Not at all.
No.
And we can connect in numerous different ways. And now Jimmy's just shared another way today that abusers especially can connect and feel and be a part of God's church.
And they should be.
They
should be included.
We need that, yes.
You are a part of the church. Paul says that, he talks about the different members of the body in 1 Corinthians 12. And Paul talks about some of these members of the body, and of course he's using an analogy about the physical body, but he said there are parts of the body that are not honorable that you cover up. And he said, but in the body of Christ, more honor is given to the parts where you feel like you're not honorable.
Right.
And he says that every single part of the body is indispensable. You can't do away with it. And I love that, because there are so many people who feel like, because they're not in this big, powerful position at church that, or they're not physically at the church building that they don't have anything to offer. That's not true.
I hope that truth reaches the hearts of a lot of our listeners, that every person is valuable.
Yeah.
No matter how broken we are, we are still of great value.
Absolutely.
And we need to remember that as we relate to our God. And just keep that thought in mind. I think that's Jimmy's message, our message to you today, that you are valuable. The church is alive. Don't be discouraged by those numbers saying that, the church is dying, because that's a misinterpretation of what we're talking about. So this is our message of encouragement to you. Get connected again. If you've, been disconnected, get connected with the church, with God's people again.
And if you need help too, let us know. We'll help connect you.
Absolutely.
Somewhere, some way, to some congregation somewhere. We'll find a way. We'll find a way to connect you, and there's no reason for you to feel abandoned and like you're not part of the church, because you are. I promise you, you're very valuable. So that's our truth bomb for today. That the church is alive and well. That the current structure as we know it is kind of crashing and burning, and that's okay, because there are certain structures that have been damaging, and if they're not damaging, they've been weak, and so those need to come down. But the kingdom lives on, and the kingdom will thrive. So, all right, we love you all, and we'll catch you next episode. Thanks again for listening to today's episode of the Speaking Out on Sex Abuse podcast. If you found it helpful, please follow on Spreaker, subscribe on Google Play Music, Apple Podcasts, or Stitcher. Share with your friends and tell the world. Join us in speaking out on sex abuse so we can change the tides and prevent abuse.